Hi, thanks for joining us for Open House Melbourne 2020. I'm Anya and this is Richard from Molecule Studio, and we're here to present our triangle house in Toorak, completed in 2018. So I'll just share with you a presentation that's going to take us through the design process, concept ideas and construction process to achieve this unique new family home. Here we go. This is a shot of the completed family home, which sits on a really tight triangular shaped site in the western urbanised part of Toorak. So the existing condition, the site sits at the junction of the main road, Canterbury Road, and along the southwestern boundary is a carriageway which underneath sits the main pram drain. It's a 200 square metre site, and on the land which our clients lived in the house before starting the design and construction, it's a dilapidated Victorian cottage that really doesn't respond to the orientation of the block or the shape of the site at all. So the remaining outdoor spaces are small and incredibly compromised.
One of the interesting things about the site was the the adjacent stand of eucalypts. So you can see in this plan a series of trunks and dashed circles to the south. Those trees form quite a dominant view when viewed from the south. You can just catch an image of those trees to the left of that image there. So what we ended up doing was borrowing that adjacent green space a lot when we were referencing the design. So this is a few of the images of the existing house. Very run down. This tree on the boundary had been pruned over many years for the power lines above, and the roots had wrapped itself around the footings of the house and caused all sorts of damage. The roof was leaking. A lot of the walls were falling apart every time it would rain. The bathroom would leak. So it was, it was really, it needed a lot of work. So it was an obvious starting point was demolition. So starting off with some of the existing site constraints, the most dominant site constraint is this 2-metre diameter brick drain. That's the main pram drain that's running along the right of way, as Anya just mentioned. This is a little survey camera. We had to record a little robot camera going down through the laneway to check the condition of the drain. We had to map the location of the drain on our site survey. When you have a new building directly adjacent to such a large drain like this, you have to work quite hard to not impose any load on the drain. So we had to work with Melbourne Water and engineer a solution to transfer the house, any load of the house beyond the drain below. So this is a series of sections we prepared as part of our negotiation meetings. And cue the highly engineered subfloor, most of which is not even visible in built form. Piles that go down 4.5 meters deep. And because of the flood overlay that's over the site, which is significant, some areas it's 1.5 off natural ground, and other areas 900 metres above natural ground. You can see the ground floor is elevated quite significantly off natural ground in this section.
Which was really another reason why renovation of the existing home or retaining parts of it wasn't a feasible option, because those existing floor levels were built at natural ground, which didn't comply with a flood overlay.
Yeah.
The other significant constraint on the site is the presence of high voltage power lines that run down the Canterbury Road main street boundary. Our site sits almost directly between two poles, so we have the maximum sag and sway is the reference for the degree to which the power lines can move and bend in hot weather or wind. So the power authority require that you can demonstrate that you don't have building envelope that sits within that zone. So it was another point of negotiation that was required on the site. So to top off what's a very small footprint, 200 square metre triangle with the drain and the power lines and flood overlay,
it was a very interesting starting point.
We had a few things to contend with.
One of the interesting things about some of these site constraints, though, is that they do make the design of the site unique. And one of the starting points, this image is quite a good reference actually, is we started to think about the idea of there's a huge impact of this flood overlay and drain that's adjacent to us. The reason for the drain being there was naturally, historically it was a creek. So we started to think, well, our house is actually sitting adjacent to a creek, and we're having to lift up this building, up off we kind of talk about it being up off the rocks to provide shelter and protection from the flood overlay. So that was a bit of a metaphorical starting point to say that we're designing this boat essentially. It's kind of moored on the site or sitting on rocks on the site. Trying to find some sort of way for it to feel comfortable given all of those constraints.
And also, I think, start to play some kind of formal references and what the form of the architecture could take. The other hugely influential aspect was this connection to the Australian landscape and these really precious standard eucalypt trees that sit directly adjacent to the site. So we were thinking in early days how we might be able to reference the qualities of the bark trunks, and timber became a large part of what the materiality of the project.
So the existing site plan, so you can see here that the existing building is very standard in form and rectilinear on a triangular site. So what you're left with is a series of very small little wedge-like outdoor spaces, and it's very dark. There's basically very little windows, so very little natural light for the interior spaces. And it's all very low and sunken. So as Anya was saying before, the flood overlay, it felt very damp. So once we realised what the flood level was, in that bottom corner, it's 1.5 metres above what the natural ground of that, the natural finish level of that room was. The dampness was sort of kind of paramount, or obvious.
So this floor plan is sort of one of our early responses to capturing the client's brief on the site. So they're a young family with, by the time we finished the project, 3 children. They were really interested in a hardworking family home that managed to achieve connection to the outdoors was a big component of their brief. And also some spaces for them to come together as a family and also retreat for particularly for the sleeping areas. So we approached the arrangement of those spaces in terms of a more active family ground floor plane and bedroom spaces on the upper floor. So the ground floor sort of treated in terms of trying to make permeable the facade boundary to enjoy the outdoor spaces as part of the interior as much as possible. There's quite extensive glazing to that shared outdoor terrace and pool zone, so you can enjoy the expansiveness of those spaces from the inside.
And you can see the way when you flick to the upper floor, so this is the lower floor, there's a dashed line signifying the upper floor above. The upper floor is an overhung form, and 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms. So in this layout, there was 3 primary bedrooms with a spare flexible room. After this was designed at the point in which they had 1 child. Through the process, as Anya was saying, that they were onto their 3rd by the time the project was finished. So there was a bit of a reconfiguration of the plan just for construction, which we'll show you the plan later, which rearranged it to fit 4 decent sized rooms. So this is the conceptual starting point we do on every project, where we try to map out in a few key diagrams what our intention is. So the top left diagram is about the idea of this container, as we mentioned before, this like boat or hull of a boat hovering in space, sitting on this rocky ground floor recessive plane. The idea that natural ventilation and light through the ground floor is very open, whereas upstairs is quite contained. The right image is drawing on the textural, natural palette of the adjacent eucalypts, of the greens, blues, textural bark colours. The bottom left image is the rationale around the joinery, so horizontal dominance within the joinery elements with its supporting verticals. And the bottom right image is around the idea that it's a very tight site, and every element and nook and cranny is utilised to its maximum, including every joinery piece is designed to be accessible with no leftover space.
So as Richard was mentioning, the local eucalyptus and tones of the Australian landscape really fed into our response to particularly the interior colour palette, thinking about the richness and tone and variation in blues, greens, that screeching red of the spotted gum bark just before it sheds for the next season. It was layering of those tones that came together for the interior palette. So the project required a planning process which was fairly straightforward, other than the negotiation with the Power and Water Authority, which required a lot of consultation and detail. But by the time we commenced on site, things ran very smoothly with our builder partner, Ian Probyn of Probyn Built.
So you can see site access is quite tricky. So they had to, this is working across the footpath, but there were small windows of time, and they basically had to get everything into the site to then enable people to use. This is the main footpath up to the local primary school just around the corner. So it's very heavily trafficked by locals. So yeah, they had to get things into site, then put the hoarding and fencing up again, and then work away. You can see once they started to dig down, the soft fill in the ground became evident. So you can see on the right they're trying to prepare footings and also drilling the piles down, and the ground was just so soft, it's like sand. So yes, luckily the weather was good enough to better get everything formed up before any potential rain damage. And once we got out of the ground, so this is the entire subfloor structure. So we're looking at eye level. Here is the actual ground floor level. So you can see us, this man, the builder on the right, standing. You can see at waist level is ground floor, and this is all of the work we needed to do to get up to the floodplain level.
That's right. So the structure is piled about 4 meters below ground, which added a reasonable proportion of cost to the project. And so these these photos illustrate the steel framing and then floor framing beyond that. So it's a lightweight construction.
So the right image shows standing from the framing of the upper floor. And then these images show that once the upper floor was framed out and constructed, there's the happy clients on the right. And the owners in the back. So this is once things started to take shape. You can start to see this is straight after the timber cladding. So that's a raw finished silver top ash batten overlay. Once it was installed, so it was quite yellowish once it's installed, but it greys off. Right now, after a couple of years of being installed, it's very nice and grey.
And then the ground floor cladding is a cement sheet, which has had a paint finish, and that wraps to the underside of this image on the left is from within the carport space, which now in lockdown has become a second children's play space with a trampoline. But that cement sheet has had a paint finish with this deep brown black colour.
And on the right shows the reveals that I'm looking through from the bedrooms upstairs. So, trying to capture linear views towards the stand of trees, but at the same time, working with the facet reveals.
Yeah,
this is in the diagram earlier where we talked about this container, this timber container of the upper floor. The ceiling on the ground floor is timber as well. So the timber battens on the cladding, and then a timber plywood ceiling in the ground floor, which folds up through the void space up to the upper floor, and the spiral stair weaves up through that.
So then we'll take you through some images of the completed family home. But first, going through the drawings of the home as it was built. So those initial concept sketches didn't change too much, other than some small additions here and there. The clients were interested to try to achieve some flexibility on the ground floor. We included a concealed pivot panel to enable them to close off that living space to conceal the acoustics when the house is busy.
The other thing we looked at doing is a series of spaces overlapping functions. So in the dining space, there's a little, on the northern side, there's a little pop out in the built form, and that houses a bench seat, so you can kind of sit there and have a little breakfast, a cup of coffee, or a little telephone call or conversation. At the same time, you can push the dining room table up to that and extend the table for a larger social function. And then we've tucked a little mud room, kind of Vita Posh, or place to empty your pockets straight off from the external carport area. And a little inflection in the plan to conceal, make the powder a little bit more private. And there's little self-closing doors on both the powder and the laundry spaces. So it's quite a hard-working little space.
Yeah, that's right. And then upstairs, the form of that level is more pure in its rounded triangular shape and consistently clad in the rough sawn timber battens.
You can see before I mentioned about the changes in the plan. So here you can see three, consistent, equally spaced bedrooms now for the three kids, and quite a generous main bedroom where there's a whole wall of joinery as you walk in through the room. The ensuite's tucked into the corner of that, or the apex of the triangle, and then a family bathroom.
That's right, and the spiral stair is really the heart of the plan, and quite a focal point in the space.
So here you can see that, especially on the bottom right image, just this kind of overhanging upper floor on top of the living space. It gets very narrow as it works its way down to the corner of the site. In the left-hand image, you can see this double height volume with a square framed skylight, where you get views of the adjacent eucalypts through that skylight.
That's right. So that we worked hard to make legible the upper floor element as being the primary reading of the house, and then that overhangs what is a recessive ground floor and the painted cement sheet cladding.
One of the things we worked really hard on is the idea of repetition. So repetition of elements of the fencing being all the same, the windows all being of the same shape, same functionality, and the ground floor just a repetition of elements, because it makes it a lot more cost effective despite appearing very bespoke. Just the cantilever on the left-hand side where the carport enters from the laneway. So yeah, so here we go with the final product.
So these images were taken, photographed by Derek Swall not long after completion. So the timber cladding is still relatively young. It's in the past 2 years it's silvered off considerably, and it's really settled well into the neighbourhood.
Also, this fence shows the landscape design. As you can see in the bottom left corner, you start to see the creeper starting to come through the fence. At the moment, that's managed to occupy the entire fence surface, and it's more of a green wall now than a fence.
So the house sits on quite a prominent position there on the street and laneway corner. The shared outdoor space at the street boundary really gives a generosity to what is a small site, and the swimming pool is raised out of the ground so that the water level coincides with the ground floor of the house. The pool is tiled in a deep black ceramic tile, so it really offers a reflection pond of the sky and the adjacent trees, even when it's not in use.
There's the view of a couple of the little hoods or the little privacy screens from the upper floor. So there's a bit of overlooking constraint around the opposite the laneway. On the other side of the laneway, there's a 2-story glass fronted building. So we had to carefully screen overlooking to those properties. But at the same time, we were really interested in the idea of referencing the kind of flaking bark aesthetic from the adjacent trees. So it's like these windows have been kind of peeled away from the facade.
Yeah, that's right. And the other element that you can get a hint of here is when the site was surveyed and the title was re-established, the existing fence lines didn't accord with the title boundary, and the new fence line is actually within about 10 square metres less than what they had previously had on site. So we negotiated with the local council to utilise that space as a landscape strip on the outside of the fence. So it provides some softening to what's quite a highly used thoroughfare down to the local kindergarten.
It's the view inside, looking at the spiral stair, prefabricated spiral stair as it comes up through the void. So you can see on the left-hand side, as Anya was saying before, the pivot panel. There's a concealed pivot panel there, just a handle evident, that can close off the living space from the kitchen. And on the right, you can see the 2 doors. On the left is the powder, on the right is the laundry. Very hard-working spaces, so the air conditioning is supplied through the drop ceiling within that niche on the right. And a lot of stainless steel surfacing within all the bench surfaces. So, tiled floors, very hard-working surfaces.
Yeah, that's right. So the spiral stair sort of acts as both the knuckle of the house and also a separator between the kitchen and dining space and the living space tucked around the corner.
So a few more views of that space that we've just been talking about. And then into the living space beyond. Lots of opportunities for little slot windows within the joinery, or on the left-hand side of the right image, there's a supply area at the top and return area at the bottom, just within the small little niche space in the back. And then we move upstairs.
So the plywood lining that you saw in the construction images was stained kind of rich, kind of almost black butt tone to sort of reference the Australian hardwood aesthetic that we had to clad that space in a more cost-effective plywood, but worked to achieve that in a different way through the staining. Upstairs, we worked with 3 really vibrant colours for the children's bedrooms, where their rooms, the walls and ceiling are painted in one tone, and then that is flipped with a different tone for the door. The joinery is all treated in a restrained white and charcoal palette, and that personality comes through in the colours for the children's rooms. So we were interested to give them spaces that they could grow into, and also have some flexibility to adapt over time. The main bedroom suite, in contrast, is much more muted and really feels like a retreat away from the action of the family around it. You traverse through a lengthened corridor, which is also the wardrobe to one side, and then the bathroom is treated in the same palette as the family bathroom, but in a much more moody set of tones.
So a few more images of details around the site. So the little rabbit ear or cat ear fence detail. The pool was formed in situ. It's hard to see on that image, but in situ formed concrete pool with a blue stone coping edge. It's a view of the little niche that we were talking about before that's adjacent to the dining space. So
and that's punched into a joinery wall. So these panels above are push to open storage for craft supplies and so on, and then underneath that bench are also cupboards for storage of toy buckets. So it's a really hard-working backdrop to what's a busy family zone.
Oh, that's the last image. So so this is a view of the laneway, freshly planted. So those wattles at the moment, they're going to grow to 4 or 5 meters tall. So they'll get up to just under the wall, just above that's the feet of the building.
So that concludes the presentation. Thanks very much for joining us. It was a really rewarding project for us, the first new home we had completed as a studio, and a lovely family project completed for my sister and her husband, so one that we continue to enjoy over the years. So thanks again.
Thank you.